Welcome to my messy studio, everyone. My name is Mark, and I'm an art professor and a professional artist. And in this video, I'm going to talk about 3 basic mistakes that make your artwork worse, and give you some tips on how to avoid them. And while there aren't all that many quick and easy fixes in art, I promise that if you take my advice and practice a little, it'll make your work better. To mix it up, I'm going to talk about 3 different mistakes. One has to do with color, one has to do with composition, and one has to do with detail. Let's get started. To illustrate this lesson, I'm going to do one sketch where I do my best to make these 3 mistakes, and another where I do my best to do things correctly. This is a tricky thing because, while it's easy enough to do a crude caricature of a bad sketch, here I'm doing my best imitation of an artist who's trying to do good work, but due to these mistakes, is not getting an optimal result. In other words, I'm doing my best imitation of a diligent, hardworking beginner. The first mistake is that your color doesn't change. What does this mean? It means that you mix your colors only one way. So if you're painting a piece of fruit, let's say an apple, you'll mix up a color for the light and then use the same color but darker for the shadow. And then you do the same thing for the color of the table and the background. The result is an artwork with boring, monotonous color that somehow ends up feeling colorless. First of all, nothing is just one color. Certainly not organic objects, which contain a lot of color variation, but not even artificial objects that seem to be of a uniform color. This is because the color of an object is heavily influenced by the light source and by the colors surrounding it. So if an apple is placed on a yellow surface, some of the yellow color will be reflected into it. And if there's a turquoise wall next to it, some of that color will also be reflected into it. Remember that the reason that you can see objects is because light is reflecting off of them, and this light not only reaches your eye, but also other objects. This interaction creates a lot of color complexity, with colors constantly shifting in value, saturation, and hue. For example, in my incorrect sketch, I'm laying in the color of the sky with only one color, ultramarine blue, and then simply diluting it to make it lighter towards the horizon. The great thing about watercolor is that it doesn't dry with perfect evenness, and this can create some degree of accidental color complexity. However, this type of simplification makes the painting less interesting, and you should try to record color shifts wherever you can see them, even if you're doing a quick sketch. That's what I did in my improved version by mixing up a darker, more purplish blue using ultramarine and a touch of alizarin crimson, and then transitioning to a lighter, more greenish blue using cobalt blue. When mixing colors, it helps to ask, what is the difference? What's the difference between the patch of color I'm looking at and the patch right next to it? Is it lighter in one spot, more saturated in another? How does the color change? It's the job of an artist to be sensitive to such changes even when doing a quick sketch. But how do you apply this in practice, especially when working on a small sketch in a limited time frame? The long answer is to develop your sensitivity to color and practice color mixing. And to that end, I have a number of color exercises on my channel that will help you. But here is a trick I use to increase the nuance and complexity of my color mixtures. In the imitation beginner sketch, I'm always mixing just one color for everything. One color for the sky, the buildings, the rooftops, the ground, and the trees. But the trick is to mix at least 2 colors for everything. In my corrected sketch, I mix up 2 colors for the sky, as you've already seen, 2 colors for the buildings, 2 colors for the rooftops, 2 colors for the trees. The interaction between these 2 slightly different mixtures creates a stimulating color complexity. For example, the walls are painted with 2 mixtures, one with burnt sienna and cobalt blue, and another with ultramarine blue and burnt umber. And this principle is applied everywhere else. So I use 2 different greens in the trees, a slightly more saturated yellow-green mix and a slightly duller greenish-blue mix. Again, the interaction between these 2 colors makes my trees look more natural and also more interesting. The principle also applies to shadows. In my beginner sketch, I mixed up just one color and then diluted it with water to make it lighter. In my corrected sketch, I mixed up 2 colors, with the darker one being more neutral and the lighter one being more influenced by the colors around it. In a landscape, usually the blue of the sky. Yes, mixing up 2 colors as opposed to 1 takes a little extra time, but not much more so, and with a touch of practice will result in sketches that are more sophisticated and interesting in terms of color. And by the way, while I'm using transparent watercolor in this lesson, this applies to any color media, be it oil, acrylic, gouache, or even when working digitally. The second mistake is not having an area of focus. one part of the composition that attracts the viewer's attention more than anything else, because it has the strongest contrast, the sharpest detail, and often the most saturated color. While there are exceptions, compositions that succeed with multiple areas of focus, in most cases, an image without an area of focus feels disorganized and less impactful. Composition is a complicated topic, and I have a number of videos on my channel that cover it. But at its most basic, you can think of it a bit like telling a story. You might spend some time setting the scene before getting to the point, but if that point is less entertaining than the build-up, then your story falls apart. This applies to image making. A picture should have one dominant area that's a little stronger than everything else in terms of contrast, detail, and saturation. Everything else should be a supporting player, setting the scene, providing a stage that emphasizes and supports the main actor. If the supporting players, those secondary details, are too strong, then they pull attention away from the area of focus and the picture loses impact. The problem is that a picture, unless it's a study of an object against an empty background, usually contains multiple interesting areas, and choosing just one and making sure that it's stronger than everything else can be tricky, requiring you to simultaneously pay attention to whatever detail you're working on and the overall balance of elements in the picture. This is why having a lack of area of focus is such a common mistake even among experienced artists. In my beginner sketch, I deliberately did not define an area of focus and instead made every part of the picture equally strong in terms of contrast and color saturation. Notice that the sharp, dark shadows at the edges of the composition in the trees, for example, pull the eye away from the center. This type of compositional error is called edge distraction. The long-term solution is to practice composition and to learn to compose in such a way as to create areas of focus. But there's a trick that you can do at the very beginning of the rendering process that will ensure that your area of focus is stronger than just about anything else. Right after penciling things in, or if you're working in pen and wash after the inking stage, gently wash everything outside the area of focus with a light gray wash. Don't use black for this purpose since it'll muddy your colors, and instead use a mix of brown and blue, something like burnt umber and ultramarine blue, or something lighter and more delicate like burnt sienna and cobalt blue. Be gentle. The idea is to knock down the contrast of everything other than your intended area of focus. Then, once that wash is dry, proceed with your painting as normal. Yes, the resulting picture might be a touch more muted in terms of color, but you'll find that this type of spotlighting will help you organize your composition, giving you less work to do, and allowing you to focus on getting those important details right. And since we're talking about details, this is a perfect segue to the next mistake. But before we discuss this error, please give me a second to tell you about my YouTube membership program, which gives you access to a large library of long-form tutorials on a variety of art making topics, and 2 new classes every single month. It's a great way to support my work, and also allows me to make videos for a small audience of like-minded people who are serious about their art education. Okay, back to the regularly scheduled programming. The third mistake usually arises mainly out of a lack of diligence than lack of skill. It happens when an artist lavishes attention on the main part of the picture at the expense of everything else. Now, you may be asking, wait, didn't you just tell us that the main part of the picture needs to contain the most detail? Yes, I did, but that doesn't mean that the rest of the picture should be afterthought, filled with space filler that no one cares to look at more than once. Elements around the area of focus need to be handled with the same loving attention, just with less contrast, saturation, and detail. In a successful work of art, everything should be contributing to creating a powerful effect. Nothing should be afterthought, nothing should be there just to fill up space. In my beginner sketch, I took the time to carefully render the complex architecture of the center tower and adjoining rooftops, and the 3 trees below it. But when it came to everything else, I started speeding up, introducing textures and details that were simplified and repetitive. I stopped looking and started filling space, and the result was that those areas became pretty boring to look at. In my corrected sketch, however, I took the time to render everything with equal or close to equal care. This means that I actually looked at the trees in the corner and introduced some specific branches that helped to add character and movement. That also means that when it came time to render the brick wall in the foreground, I took the time to add specific detail in the way the bricks and rocks were arranged, as opposed to just drawing a generic brick pattern. One of the most important principles in art making is to treat every part with equal attention, whether it's in the area of focus or not. It means that when I'm painting a simple background, I'll make sure it has a touch of color complexity, maybe a value gradient or some texture. If I'm painting a landscape, it means that when I render grass, I don't start creating a pattern that looks like lined up toothpicks, but will take the time to make some of the grass longer in places, some laying flat, some dried out or turned yellow, so on and so forth. It means that when I'm rendering a portrait, I'll make sure that the bunched up folds of cloth at the elbow follow the form, even if that elbow is at the bottom of the painting and is almost lost in shadow. If you're thinking, what's the point? No one will notice the extra effort. Ask yourself, are you making art for those who can't be bothered to look carefully, or for those discerning few who take the time to appreciate good work when they see it? Here are the two sketches side by side for comparison. The second one didn't take much longer than the first, but because I carefully avoided those 3 mistakes, I think it's the better version. Hopefully you agree. I hope you found this short lesson useful, and if you did, please subscribe and stay tuned to many more like it. Thank you so much for watching, and see you back in my messy studio very soon. Bye for now.